September the 22nd, 2017. As we had 2 quakes today, and we need to keep an eye on what's going on. We've seen since that massive X flare, that was an X 9.3 if I remember how they finally rated it. It struck offshore Mexico with an 8.2 earthquake, and then a week later or so we had the 7.1 just a few days ago. They're still trying to dig people out of that. But I think that X flare messed with a fault that lies between the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean. It runs sideways there just south of Cuba. But anyway, these are the quakes today. Notice 1 day magnitude 2.5. This is in the top left. Now, what we're dealing with is the Cascadia fault zone. And not only that, because it's at the bottom of the Cascadia fault zone, that's putting pressure on the top of the San Andreas fault. Now, if anybody's been watching for the last few weeks, there's been several reports about California is overdue for a big quake. This is what it looked like from one of the seismograms today from Butler Butte, Oregon. This is not that far north from California. But you see the first quake, that was a little less than a 4.0. Then the second quake, now I think it came in as a 5.9 initially. But this thing lasted for almost 6 minutes as far as strong quakes. And if you look at the entire time, you've got about 15 minutes until it starts coming back down. And then in between those quakes, you see 3 kind of warning shots, very small. But this is the quakes that were coming in today. Now, this fault zone is dangerous, and I've said for the last 5 years that when something happens in the U.S., I don't think it's going to be the new Madrid fault that we have to watch out for, and I don't think it's going to be Yellowstone at first. It's going to be the Cascadia fault zone. What's concerning about this is we had the solar winds were not that high, but we had these slight changes. See this around 1900 hours with the quake off Ferndale, just a slight increase in temperature and solar wind speed and plasma density. That's telling you how weak our shields are. Weak shields are a common thing during solar minimum. And we're seeing that. What we got is a couple of coronal holes. One just passed and one is coming around. And when you see a coronal hole on the surface of the sun like you're looking at now, and it's directly Earth-facing, just like this satellite image is, it still takes a couple of days for that energy to make it to our planet 93 million miles away. And when you're dealing with this 11.8-year solar cycle, which is, a lot of people say 12 years, but it's about 11.8. Did you realize it coincides with the sun's binary twin Jupiter, which is a gas giant? Also, it doesn't have the surface. It's different type gases exploding, creating all of these hurricanes and swirling patterns that you see there. But there's an 11.8-year orbit between the sun and Jupiter. And the reason I say between the sun and Jupiter is because, unlike the other planets in our solar system, Jupiter does not orbit the sun. It actually affects the sun's orbit itself. In other words, there's a point of rotation. The Earth is so close and small to the sun that if you look at the actual point of rotation, it's inside the sun's surface. But if you look at the rotation point, in other words, the point to where both planets, or the sun and its binary twin Jupiter, rotate, it is not within the sun's area. It's outside of that. And as Jupiter rotates within those 11.8 years, there's a 2 LD difference. A 2 AU difference, or astronomical unit difference, in that close approach and the furthest approach. In other words, it's orbiting the sun every 11.8 years, but it's not a round orbit. In other words, for half of the orbit, it's getting closer, and that's when you're seeing us going to the beginning of solar maximum, and that maximum has a rise and peak of about 5.75 years. Then for the other 5.75 years, you're dealing with coming out of solar minimum like we are now. And guys, that has everything to do with why the ancients called Jupiter Nibiru. Look at the Sumerian text if you don't think that's what I'm talking about. So let me go back a moment. I said a few moments ago that there's a difference in the orbit as far as the close approach to Jupiter and the Sun of about 2 AU, and that's an astronomical unit. 1 astronomical unit is 93 million miles. That's an average. And the way they came up with the AU unit is that's the average distance between the Earth and the Sun. So what you're dealing with here is about 186 million miles difference between the close approach of Jupiter during solar maximum than when we're in solar minimum. It's because of the reaction between the binary gas twin of our planet. But guys, we're watching it. You watch it on the West Coast. There's a lot of unusual events lately. All of a sudden we have these massive solar flares. X.9s. You don't see that, guys. That's not average. Anywhere, in anybody's book, you see a few of those. The strongest one that ever occurred that was stronger than that was on the back side of the Sun. And yet it ionized the upper layer of the Earth's atmosphere. So we've got a lot of pressure, and I think the X9.3 weakened the fault zone. That's midway in the eastern section of the Ring of Fire, and that was in Mexico. It hit offshore during that one, then we had the 7.1. Now, guys, we are all aware that tomorrow's when we have the alignment going into late tonight that everyone's talking about with Revelation 12. And there's something else going on that has to do with tomorrow, and it kind of all lines up, but it's the equinox. Autumn begins in the northern hemisphere and spring in the southern hemisphere today at 4:02 p.m. Eastern Time. That's when the sun crosses the equator headed south for the season. Astronomers call this date the equinox because night and day are almost equal length. It also marks the beginning of the aurora season, and talks about data proves it. Auroras love equinoxes. The Earth is, the tilt now is going away from the sun. We passed that point, and it's going to start to become cooler. But also this alignment occurs, and really, guys, the alignment occurs because of the movement of the Earth and the inner planets and the Earth's perspective from that point. The stars are not really moving that much in comparison to the way we move, but that's what's going on along with the September 3rd Revelation 12 event that's been talked about. We're watching it, guys. You watch it. It's a heads up. Be safe.